A black billionaire walks into his own bank and is told to get lost by the staff. They don't recognize him. They think he's just another man who doesn't belong. But minutes later, he walks back in, suited, powerful, and deadly calm. And this time, he fires everyone. Because what they didn't know? He secretly owned the bank, and what he found during his undercover visit would expose years of racism, corruption, and lies buried deep within the system. Why did he really go undercover? And what secret did one intern uncover that changed everything? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Jeremiah Rhodes's private office, painting golden streaks across the polished mahogany desk where he sat. 50 stories above San Francisco Bay, the view was breathtaking. Sailboats dotted the water like tiny white butterflies, and the Golden Gate Bridge stretched majestically across the horizon. But Jeremiah's attention was fixed on the stack of documents before him. His fingers, steady and deliberate, turned each page of the acquisition agreement. The leather chair creaked softly as he leaned forward, his reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose. The numbers were exactly as negotiated. 51% controlling interest in Dominion Trust, purchased through Nova Cascade Holdings, a shell company he'd created specifically for this purpose. 20 years, he murmured to himself, remembering the long journey from writing code in his cramped studio apartment to building the software that would revolutionize banking security. Now, that same expertise had given him the means to acquire one of the oldest financial institutions in the country. He picked up the Mont Blanc pen, a gift he'd bought himself after his first million, and signed his name with careful precision. Each stroke of the pen felt weightier than usual, more significant. This wasn't just another business deal, this was personal. The intercom buzzed, interrupting his thoughts. "Mr. Rhodes, the courier from legal just delivered an urgent package. Should I bring it in?" "Yes, Sarah. Thank you." His assistant entered, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. She placed a thick manila envelope on his desk, her expression concerned. "It's marked confidential, hand delivery only." Jeremiah nodded, waiting until she left before breaking the seal. The contents spilled out across his desk, internal memos, loan applications, employee records, all spanning decades. As he read, his jaw tightened. The evidence was damning. Loan applications from minority neighborhoods systematically marked for higher interest rates. Property appraisals consistently undervalued in redlined districts. Qualified candidates of color passed over for promotion, while less experienced white employees advanced. The DEI initiatives were nothing more than window dressing, carefully crafted PR moves with no substantial change in policy or practice. Jeremiah stood walking to the window. His reflection stared back at him. Expensive suit, carefully trimmed beard, the picture of corporate success. But beneath that polished exterior, anger simmered. He pressed the intercom. "Sarah, I need you to clear my schedule for the next 2 weeks and get me visitor credentials for Dominion Trust's main branch." Minutes later, Sarah stood in his office, tablet in hand. "Sir, with all due respect, is that wise? The acquisition hasn't been publicly announced yet. If anyone recognizes you—" "They won't," Jeremiah interrupted, turning from the window. "I'll be just another customer. Besides, who would expect the new owner to show up at a branch bank?" "But the security risks are minimal," he finished. "I need to see it for myself, Sarah, not through reports or statistics. I need to witness how they treat people when they think no one important is watching." "The board won't like this," she warned. Jeremiah's expression hardened. "The board works for me now. And if I'm going to fix this, I need to feel the rot from the inside." He gestured to the scattered documents. "These papers tell a story, but they don't show the human cost. I need to see it with my own eyes." Sarah nodded reluctantly, making notes on her tablet. "I'll have the credentials ready by morning. Will you at least take a security detail?" "Number that would defeat the purpose." He glanced at his watch, past 9 already. "That's all for tonight, Sarah. Go home." After she left, Jeremiah sank back into his chair. The office was quiet now, the only sound the soft hum of the climate control system. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a worn envelope he'd placed there earlier that morning. Inside was a photograph, its edges softened with age. In it, a young woman stood at a bank counter, her expression a mixture of dignity and despair. She wore her best dress, clutching a folder of documents. Behind the counter, a loan officer's dismissive expression told the whole story. Jeremiah traced his mother's face with his finger. She had worked 2 jobs, saved every penny, done everything right. But none of that mattered to Dominion Trust 30 years ago. All they saw was the color of her skin. He slipped the photo into his breast pocket, feeling its weight against his heart. "Full circle," he whispered into the quiet office. The city lights twinkled below, a constellation of artificial stars. In less than 24 hours, he would walk into the same bank that had denied his mother's dreams, not as a supplicant, but as its owner. The irony wasn't lost on him, but this wasn't about revenge. It was about transformation, turning an instrument of oppression into a force for change. The photograph crinkled slightly as he stood, reminding him of its presence. His mother had taught him that anger without purpose was wasted energy. "Make it mean something," she'd always said. Tomorrow he would begin doing exactly that. The Monday morning sun glinted off the towering glass facade of Dominion Trust's flagship branch in Manhattan. Jeremiah adjusted the collar of his plain navy button-down shirt, deliberately chosen to blend in rather than stand out. His usual tailored suits and designer accessories were replaced with off-the-rack business casual, khakis, sensible shoes, and a basic leather messenger bag that had seen better days. He paused at the entrance, studying his reflection in the polished brass doors. Without his usual power suits and commanding presence, he looked different, just another face in the crowd. Perfect. Taking a deep breath, he pushed through the revolving door and stepped into the marble-floored lobby. The security guard barely glanced up from his crossword puzzle as Jeremiah passed through the metal detector. At the reception desk, a woman with perfectly coiffed blonde hair looked up with practiced politeness that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning," Jeremiah said, keeping his voice modulated and unremarkable. "I'm Jay Rowe, the new intern from the Silent Partner Group." The receptionist's fingers clacked against her keyboard. Rowe, she muttered, frowning slightly. "Oh yes, here you are. Take a seat in the waiting area. HR will be down shortly." Jeremiah settled into one of the leather chairs, positioning himself to observe the morning traffic. The lobby slowly filled with customers and employees, their footsteps echoing off the marble floors. He noticed how the security guard suddenly became more alert when certain customers entered, following them with his eyes while others walked by unnoticed. 20 minutes later, a harried-looking HR associate appeared, clutching a stack of folders. "Mr. Rowe?" she called out, stumbling slightly over the name. "Please follow me." The orientation room was already half full with other new employees, mostly young faces fresh from college, their enthusiasm evident in their eager postures and bright eyes. Jeremiah took a seat near the back, pulling out a notepad and pen. The HR associate, who had introduced herself as Ms. Patterson, began going around the room. "Let's all introduce ourselves," she chirped. "Tell us your name, position, and something interesting about yourself." She pointed to each person in turn, nodding and smiling as they spoke. But when she reached Jeremiah's section, her eyes skipped right over him, moving to the young woman beside him. Jeremiah cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said politely. "You missed me." Ms. Patterson's smile tightened. "Oh, I'm so sorry. Please go ahead." "I'm Jay Rowe, intern with the Partner Group program," Jeremiah said evenly. A few of the other new employees turned to look at him, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and confusion. An intern his age was unusual, and he could see the questions forming in their minds. After orientation, they were each handed their employee badges. Jeremiah stared at his, where Jerome Rowe was printed in bold letters beneath his photo. "There seems to be a mistake with my name," he said, showing the badge to Ms. Patterson. She barely glanced at it. "Oh, I'm sure it's fine for now. You can submit a correction request through HR's online portal. It usually takes about 2 weeks to process. Before Jeremiah could respond, a tall man in an expensive suit strode into the room. "All right, newbies," he announced. "I'm Mr. Davidson, Senior Associate. Time to assign your first day duties." He began rattling off assignments: desk setups, system orientations, shadowing opportunities. When he reached Jeremiah, his smile took on a slightly different quality. "Mr. Jerome, was it? We've got a special project for you. The break room fridge needs a thorough cleaning. Some of our associates have been complaining about the smell." A few snickers rippled through the room. Jeremiah nodded, keeping his expression neutral. "Of course, Mr. Davidson." As he gathered cleaning supplies from the janitor's closet, Jeremiah kept one eye on the lobby. A well-dressed black woman approached the service desk, clutching a folder of documents. "I'm here about the small business loan application," she said, her voice carrying across the marble floor. "I brought everything on the checklist." The loan officer, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, flipped through the papers with a frown. "I'm sorry, but we're going to need additional documentation. Your business plan needs more detail, and we'll need 3 years of projected earnings instead of 2. "But the checklist only asked for 2 years, the woman protested. "I spent weeks putting this together with my accountant." "Requirements change," the loan officer said dismissively. "Come back when you have everything in order." Just then, a white man in a golf shirt and khakis approached another service desk. He smiled broadly at the teller. "Hey there, forgot my wallet in my other pants. Any chance I could make a withdrawal anyway?" The teller smiled back. "Of course, Mr. Thompson. As long as you can verify your social security number and address, we can help you out." Jeremiah's jaw tightened as he watched the scene unfold. He pulled out his phone, discreetly activating the recording app he'd had installed. By lunchtime, his hands smelled of cleaning products despite the rubber gloves he'd worn. The break room fridge was spotless, though the task had been clearly meant to humiliate rather than utilize his skills. He sat alone at a corner table, unwrapping the sandwich he'd brought from home. 2 associates entered, heading for the coffee machine. They spoke in loud voices, clearly aware of his presence but acting as if he were invisible. "Another DEI project," one said, stirring creamer into his coffee. "Did you see his resume? Probably some community college dropout they had to hire to fill the quota." "At least they stuck him with fridge duty," the other laughed. "Better than having him mess up anything important." Jeremiah's fingers tightened around his sandwich, but his face remained impassive. He pulled out his phone and typed a quick message to Sarah. "Recorders are working. It's worse than I expected." He glanced at the newly cleaned fridge where his deliberately misspelled name had already been scrawled on a yogurt container with a question mark. Jerome? The casual cruelty of it all was both familiar and infuriating. But he remained still, observing, recording, gathering evidence for the reckoning to come. The next morning, Jeremiah arrived at Dominion Trust while the sky was still tinged with purple dawn light. He'd chosen another unremarkable outfit: brown slacks and a light blue button-down shirt that had seen better days. The security guard was different from yesterday, but the cursory glance was the same, just another face, not worth remembering. The marble lobby was empty except for the cleaning crew finishing their morning routine. The sharp scent of lemon cleaner hung in the air as Jeremiah made his way to his assigned desk, a cramped cubicle in the far corner of the open office space. He settled in, arranging his worn messenger bag and the simple lunch he'd packed. Mr. Davidson appeared at 8:15 a.m., his expensive suit pristine as ever. He seemed surprised to find Jeremiah already at his desk. "Jerome," he said, deliberately using the wrong name again. "Good, you're here early. We've got a special project for you today." His smile didn't reach his eyes. The basement archives need organizing. Files from the past quarter need to be sorted and stored properly. "Of course, sir," Jeremiah replied evenly. "I'll get started right away." The basement was a maze of metal shelving units filled with cardboard boxes and manila folders. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows in the windowless space. The air was thick with the musty smell of old paper and dust. Jeremiah began methodically working through the stacks of files. His fingers were soon coated with a fine layer of dust, but he maintained his careful, thorough approach. Each file was examined, sorted, and placed in its proper location. He knew they'd expected him to rush through the task carelessly. After all, who would care about perfectly organized files in a basement no one visited? Around mid-morning, while sorting through a box of loan applications, a torn piece of paper caught his attention. It was part of what appeared to be an internal report, partially shredded but still legible in sections. Jeremiah carefully laid out the pieces on a nearby desk. The fragments told a disturbing story. Loan approval rates for black applicants were consistently 40% lower than those for white applicants with similar credit scores and financial profiles. The report appeared to be from the previous quarter, marked Internal Review Confidential. "What are you doing?" Jeremiah looked up to find his supervisor, Ms. Reynolds, standing at the bottom of the stairs. Her sharp eyes moved from his face to the pieces of paper on the desk. "I found this while sorting files," Jeremiah said, keeping his voice neutral. "It seems like an important document. Should it have been shredded?" Ms. Reynolds' lips pressed into a thin line. "You're just an intern," she said coldly. "Don't ask too many questions. Focus on your assigned task, filing, nothing else." "Of course," Jeremiah replied. "My apologies." She watched as he swept the torn pieces into a trash bin, then turned and clicked back up the stairs in her heels. Once her footsteps faded, Jeremiah retrieved the pieces and carefully tucked them into his messenger bag. During his lunch break, Jeremiah positioned himself in the lobby, ostensibly reviewing orientation materials while actually observing the customer service interactions. The hidden camera in his tie clip recorded everything. An elderly Hispanic couple entered, holding hands and speaking quietly to each other in Spanish. They approached the information desk where a young teller sat filing her nails. "Good afternoon," the man said with a slight accent. "We would like to speak with someone about refinancing our mortgage." The teller barely looked up. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, we thought—" "Sorry," she cut him off. "You need an appointment for that. You'll have to come back another day." She turned her attention back to her nails. "Please," the woman said softly. "We took the bus across town to come here. Perhaps someone could spare a few minutes?" "Bank policy," the teller said firmly. "No appointments, no meetings. You can call the scheduling line or use our website." The couple stood there for a moment longer before slowly turning away, their shoulders slumped in defeat. As they walked toward the door, a well-dressed white man in his 40s strode in, heading straight for the same desk. "Hey there," he said cheerfully. "Need to talk to someone about investment options. Got time for me?" The teller's demeanor transformed instantly. She sat up straight, offering a bright smile. "Of course. Let me get Jennifer for you. She's one of our personal bankers. Would you like some coffee while you wait?" "That'd be great, thanks." Jeremiah watched as the man was escorted to a comfortable seating area, served coffee in a real mug, and promptly met with a personal banker, all without an appointment. His pen moved steadily across his notepad, recording times and details. That evening, Jeremiah sat in his hotel room, the city lights twinkling beyond the window. His tablet displayed multiple video feeds from the day, captured by various hidden cameras he'd strategically placed throughout the branch. He made careful notes of timestamps, marking particularly egregious incidents for his legal team to review later. The elderly couple's rejection, 2:14 p.m. The white investor's immediate service, 2:17 p.m. Ms. Reynolds' dismissal of the discriminatory loan report, 10:43 a.m. Each incident was another piece of evidence, another brick in the wall of systemic discrimination he was documenting. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the glittering skyline of Manhattan. "They think I'm invisible," he muttered, his reflection ghosted against the glass. "Let's see how far they'll go." The Wednesday morning sun cast long shadows through Dominion Trust's glass facade as Jeremiah made his way through the revolving doors. 3 days in, and the security guard barely glanced at his badge anymore. Just another face in the crowd, exactly as he'd planned. He headed toward Conference Room B, where the weekly team meeting was scheduled. The room was already filling up with associates in crisp suits and polished shoes, the smell of expensive coffee wafting through the air. Jeremiah took a seat near the back, arranging his notepad and pen neatly on the table. Mr. Davidson entered, his presence immediately commanding attention. His gaze swept the room, landing on Jeremiah with obvious displeasure. "Excuse me," Davidson said, his voice carrying that particular tone of polite disdain that seemed standard issue at Dominion Trust. "This meeting is for real staff only. Interns aren't included." Jeremiah maintained his calm demeanor, though his jaw tightened slightly. "The orientation packet mentioned all staff meetings were open." "That's for regular interns," Davidson cut him off. "You can make better use of your time restocking office supplies. The third-floor supply closet needs organizing, and the lobby coffee station is a mess." Several associates smirked behind their leather portfolios. Jeremiah stood slowly, gathering his materials. "Of course, sir. I'll get right on that." The supply closet was a cramped space that smelled of toner and rubber bands. Jeremiah methodically arranged paper clips, sticky notes, and printer paper, documenting everything with the tiny camera hidden in his tie clip. Each discriminatory interaction was another piece of evidence, another nail in Dominion Trust's coffin. After finishing with the supplies, he moved to the lobby coffee station. The chrome and glass setup was actually quite clean, but he wiped it down anyway, straightening sugar packets and stirrers with careful precision. A couple of associates walked past whispering and snickering. He pretended not to notice. During his break, Jeremiah headed to the staff lounge carrying his simple brown bag lunch. Just before entering, he heard voices from inside, 2 senior associates he recognized from previous days. "Can you believe they keep sending us these diversity hires?" The first voice belonged to Thomas Wheeler, a senior loan officer. "Soon they'll have us reporting to janitors and ex-cons." "Right?" That was Peter Morris, head of consumer accounts. "Like that new one, Jay or Jerome or whatever. Probably can't even read a balance sheet." Jeremiah stepped into the doorway, his presence silencing their laughter. Both men turned, startled but quickly recovering their composure behind masks of corporate indifference. "Excuse me," Jeremiah said quietly but firmly. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. Would you care to elaborate on those comments?" Wheeler's face reddened. "Were you eavesdropping?" "I was walking to the break room, which I believe I have every right to do." Morris stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "You need to learn your place here, intern." "And where exactly is that place?" Jeremiah asked, his voice steady. Wheeler reached for his phone. "That's it, I'm calling security. This is threatening behavior." "Threatening?" Jeremiah remained perfectly still. "I'm simply asking you to explain your comments." Within minutes, 2 security guards appeared. They were large men in dark uniforms, hands already on their handcuffs. "This intern was harassing us," Morris declared. "He needs to be removed." "I haven't moved from this spot or raised my voice," Jeremiah stated calmly. "I only asked them to explain their discriminatory comments." The guards approached anyway, one pulling out his handcuffs. "Turn around, hands behind your back." "May I ask why I'm being handcuffed?" Jeremiah complied without resistance, though his eyes remained fixed on Wheeler and Morris. "Because you don't belong here," Wheeler sneered, his corporate mask finally slipping to reveal the ugliness beneath. As the guards began leading Jeremiah out, a voice rang out from the doorway. "Wait! Stop!" Ava Chen, one of the other interns, stepped forward. She was small in stature but stood straight-backed, her voice clear despite its slight tremor. "He didn't do anything wrong. I heard everything. They were the ones making racist comments." The guards hesitated, looking toward the HR office visible through the glass walls. Inside, Mrs. Patterson, the HR director, sat at her desk, deliberately looking down at some paperwork. She made no move to intervene. "Please," Ava continued, her hands clenched at her sides. "This isn't right. You can't just remove someone for asking a question." But the guards had their orders. They continued marching Jeremiah toward the lobby, past startled employees and confused clients. Ava followed them partway, her protests growing quieter as she realized no one else would speak up. At the entrance, Jeremiah turned for one last look. The receptionist, the same one who had ignored him on his first day, quickly looked down at her computer screen, her fingers typing at nothing. Through the glass walls, he could see Wheeler and Morris watching with satisfied smirks. Ava stood alone in the middle of the lobby, her face a mixture of anger and helplessness. The vibration of his phone in his pocket caught his attention. The guards were removing the handcuffs now that they were outside. As they walked away, Jeremiah pulled out his phone and read the message from his lawyer. "Boardroom's ready, time to make it official." The black SUV was already idling at the curb when Jeremiah emerged from Dominion Trust's glass doors. His intern badge still hung from his shirt pocket, a small piece of plastic that spoke volumes about the institution's prejudices. The car's tinted windows offered welcome privacy as he slipped into the cool leather interior. Elena Marquez sat waiting for him, her usual calm presence a stark contrast to the morning's tension. Her dark suit was perfectly pressed, her expression focused as she handed him a thick legal folder bound in blue leather. "Everything's lined up," she said simply. No wasted words. That's why Jeremiah valued her counsel so highly. She understood that sometimes the most powerful statements were the quietest ones. Jeremiah opened the folder, scanning through the documents as the SUV pulled away from the curb. Each page represented another piece of evidence, another nail in the coffin of Dominion Trust's discriminatory practices. 3 days of undercover work had yielded more than enough ammunition. "The security footage," he asked, not looking up from the papers. "All preserved and authenticated," Elena confirmed. "Our tech team has already compiled the highlights. The audio from the break room incident is particularly damning." The drive to his penthouse suite took them through Manhattan's busy streets, past the gleaming towers that represented both the best and worst of American banking. Jeremiah remained quiet, absorbing the details of their legal strategy. Elena occasionally pointed out key sections, her manicured finger tapping specific paragraphs that required his attention. When they arrived at his building, the doorman recognized him immediately, quite different from his treatment at the bank. The private elevator whisked them up to the penthouse floor, where they found Jeremiah's team already assembled in his spacious living room. The space had been transformed into a makeshift command center. Laptops covered the glass coffee table, legal documents were spread across the dining room table, and PR specialists huddled around a large monitor displaying social media metrics. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, but nobody was admiring the scenery today. 10 minutes, Jeremiah announced to the room. He headed straight for his bedroom, where his valet had already laid out a navy suit that cost more than most Dominion Trust employees made in a month. The tailoring was perfect, it had to be. Image mattered in banking, as the past 3 days had proven all too well. As he changed, he could hear the muffled sounds of his team preparing in the other room. Elena's voice rose occasionally above the others, giving clear, precise instructions. She'd been through similar situations with him before, though perhaps none quite this personal. Returning to the living room, Jeremiah found everyone gathered around the main screen. They'd prepared a final cut of the internal footage, a devastating 15-minute compilation that showed pattern after pattern of discrimination. The security cameras had caught everything. The subtle dismissals, the different treatment of clients based on race, the whispered comments when they thought no one was listening. Jeremiah watched it all with an impassive expression, though his hands, clasped behind his back, tightened slightly at certain moments. When it finished, the room was silent, waiting for his response. "Keep it clean," he said finally. "No theatrics, just truth." The team nodded, understanding perfectly. This wasn't about revenge or public humiliation. It was about systematic change, about making sure what happened to his mother, what happened to countless others, wouldn't keep happening. They moved with practiced efficiency after that. The PR team packed up their materials, the lawyers gathered their documents, and Elena made a few final calls to ensure everything was in place. Within 20 minutes, they were heading back to Dominion Trust. This time, the SUV wasn't alone. 2 more vehicles carried additional team members, and Jeremiah's private security detail, professionals who looked nothing like the guards who'd handcuffed him earlier. They pulled up to the bank's entrance in a coordinated arrival that drew immediate attention from people on the street. Jeremiah emerged first, his transformation complete. Gone was the hesitant intern in business casual attire. In his place stood a man who controlled billions in assets, whose software powered half the banking systems in the country. Elena flanked him on one side, another attorney on the other, with security guards taking up protective positions. They entered through the main doors with purpose and authority. The lobby fell silent as heads turned to watch their progress. The receptionist, who had ignored J. Rowe for 3 days straight, now stared open-mouthed at the procession. Several associates who had smirked at the intern now pressed themselves against walls, trying to become invisible. Near the loan officer's desk, Ava Chen stood frozen, a stack of files clutched to her chest. Her eyes met Jeremiah's, confusion and recognition warring on her face as she processed the transformation she was witnessing. He gave her a small nod as he passed, a gesture of acknowledgement that seemed to both reassure and perplex her further. The group moved with purpose toward the executive conference room, their footsteps echoing on the marble floor. No one tried to stop them. No one asked for ID or appointments. Amazing what a well-cut suit and an air of authority could do in a place like this. The branch manager, Richard Collins, was in the conference room, reviewing quarterly reports when they entered. He looked up with the automatic annoyance of someone used to being in charge and not appreciating interruptions. Recognition hadn't hit yet. He'd never bothered to actually look at the intern he'd helped humiliate over the past 3 days. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone carrying that same smug superiority that had colored every interaction during Jeremiah's undercover stint. Jeremiah stood at the head of the conference table, Elena and his team arranging themselves around him like a well-choreographed dance. His voice, when he spoke, was exactly as calm and measured as it had been in the break room earlier, only now it carried the weight of real power behind it. "No," he replied evenly, "but I can help you pack." The hastily arranged all-staff meeting created a wave of disruption through Dominion Trust's flagship branch. Employees filed into the large conference room with varying degrees of annoyance and anxiety written across their faces. Some checked their watches repeatedly, while others whispered in small clusters, shooting furtive glances at the front of the room where a projector screen had been set up. The conference room, with its mahogany table and leather chairs, usually projected an air of old-money stability. Today, it felt more like a courtroom. The afternoon sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the plush carpet. Jeremiah stood silently at the head of the table, his presence commanding attention without saying a word. His navy suit was impeccable, his posture relaxed but purposeful. Elena Marquez sat to his right, a stack of folders arranged precisely in front of her. 2 security guards stood at attention near the doors. "What's this about?" someone muttered from the back of the room. "I have client calls waiting." "Did you see what happened in the lobby earlier?" another whispered. "With that intern?" The whispers grew louder as more people entered, filling every available seat and lining the walls. The branch manager, Richard Collins, sat rigid in his chair, his earlier smugness replaced by a thin sheen of sweat on his forehead. When the last employee squeezed in, Elena nodded to one of the security guards, who closed the door with a decisive click. The sound made several people jump. Without a word, Jeremiah pressed a button on the remote in his hand. The lights dimmed automatically, and the projector hummed to life. The footage began to play. The first clip showed the break room captured from multiple angles. The audio was crystal clear as 2 senior associates mocked the DEI project. Their faces drained of color as they watched themselves on screen. More footage rolled, a black customer being asked for excessive documentation, while a white customer sailed through with minimal verification. An elderly Hispanic couple being turned away without assistance. Whispered comments in hallways about keeping standards up and maintaining the right image. Then came the security footage from that morning. Jeremiah calmly standing in the break room, being confronted by senior staff, and ultimately being handcuffed and escorted out while HR personnel watched through their office windows doing nothing. Gasps echoed across the room. Some employees shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others stared at their hands. A few stood up, moving toward the doors, only to find their path blocked by the security guards. "Please remain seated," Elena said firmly, her voice carrying to every corner of the room. The screen went dark. In the sudden silence, Jeremiah finally spoke. His voice was measured, carrying no trace of anger despite the evidence they'd just witnessed. "I'm Jeremiah Rhodes," he said simply. "As of 9 a.m. today, I own 72% of Dominion Trust. That makes me your employer." The revelation hit the room like a physical force. Several people audibly gasped. Richard Collins looked like he might be sick. Jeremiah picked up a folder from the table, opening it with deliberate slowness. The rustle of paper seemed unnaturally loud in the tense silence. "When I began this investigation," he continued, "I expected to find systemic issues. What I discovered was worse than I anticipated. The culture of discrimination in this institution isn't just systemic, it's celebrated. That ends today." He began reading names from the list. Each one rang out like a judge's gavel. Richard Collins, Sarah Whitman, James Peterson. The list continued, 17 names in total. "Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings." The named employees sat frozen, as if hoping they'd heard wrong. When security guards began moving toward them, the reality set in. Some protested, others remained silent, but all were efficiently escorted from the room. Jeremiah continued with another list. "The following 6 individuals are placed under investigation pending review of their actions and decisions." More names, more shocked faces. Finally, he addressed the remaining employees. "Everyone else is dismissed for the next 48 hours. This is paid suspension pending a full review of our practices and policies. You'll receive detailed communications about next steps within 24 hours. The room sat in stunned silence. Nobody moved at first, as if waiting for permission. Finally, Elena stood up. "You may go now," she announced. "Please check your email regularly for updates." People began filing out slowly, their movements stiff and uncertain. Some cast worried glances at Jeremiah, others kept their eyes firmly on the floor. The room gradually emptied until only a handful of people remained. Ava Chen was the last to leave. She stood from her chair slowly, gathering her notebook with careful movements. As she walked toward the door, she paused, turning to look at Jeremiah. Their eyes met across the room, hers filled with a complex mixture of understanding and uncertainty, his steady and resolute. The moment stretched for a second longer before she turned and walked through the door, leaving Jeremiah and his team alone in the conference room. The emptiness of Dominion Trust's flagship branch felt different at night. The usual bustling energy and pretentious atmosphere had given way to something more honest, more raw. The overhead lights were dimmed to their evening setting, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors as Jeremiah Rhodes walked slowly through the hallways. His footsteps echoed in the silence, each step a reminder of his earlier journey through these same corridors. But then, as a supposed intern, treated with disdain and suspicion. Now, as the majority owner, he moved with quiet purpose, taking in every detail of the space that had become ground zero for his mission of change. The staff lounge door was unlocked. Jeremiah pushed it open, letting his hand linger on the cool metal handle. The room looked smaller at night, more intimate without the harsh fluorescent lighting and judgmental stares. The counter he'd been ordered to clean gleamed under the soft evening lights. He ran his hand across its smooth surface, remembering the satisfied smirks of those who'd assigned him the menial task. The break room still held echoes of cruel laughter and dismissive comments. He could almost hear the voices. Another DEI project. The memory of cold metal handcuffs against his wrists was still fresh, as was the feeling of being pushed toward the exit like an unwanted intruder. The very air in this room seemed thick with accumulated prejudice, years of casual cruelty and systemic discrimination packed into its walls. Jeremiah walked to the window, looking out at the city lights twinkling against the darkening sky. The view was beautiful, but it felt tainted now, knowing what had transpired behind these windows day after day, year after year. A soft knock at the door pulled him from his thoughts. Ava Chen stood in the doorway, a cardboard box tucked under one arm. She looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable than she had during the day. Her professional facade had cracked slightly, revealing the uncertainty beneath. "Mr. Rhodes," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "I didn't expect anyone to be here." "Neither did I," Jeremiah replied, turning to face her fully. "Please come in." "And it's Jeremiah." Ava hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. She placed her box on a nearby table, her movements careful and measured. "I wasn't sure," she started, then paused to gather her thoughts. "After today, I wasn't sure if I still had a job. I thought it would be better to collect my things now, quietly." Jeremiah gestured to one of the chairs at the small break room table. "Have a seat, Ava." She sat down, smoothing her skirt with nervous hands. Jeremiah took the chair across from her, maintaining a respectful distance while keeping his body language open and attentive. "You tried to stop them today," he said. It wasn't a question. Ava nodded, her eyes focusing on some distant point beyond the window. "I knew it was wrong. What they were doing to you, what they've been doing to so many people." She took a deep breath, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of long-buried pain. "I've seen it before. Too many times." "Tell me," Jeremiah said simply. Ava's hands clasped together tightly in her lap. "My father," she started, then steadied herself. "He had a restaurant in Chinatown. A good one. Family recipes passed down through generations. We weren't rich, but we were doing okay. Then in 2009, the kitchen equipment started failing. He needed a loan to upgrade everything." She looked directly at Jeremiah now, her eyes bright with remembered hurt. "He came here, to this branch. His English wasn't perfect, but his paperwork was. The business was profitable. He had collateral. But they rejected him without even looking at his documents properly. No real explanation given." Jeremiah listened intently, his face showing understanding rather than pity. "The equipment kept breaking down," Ava continued. "We lost customers, had to close within 6 months. My father—" Her voice caught slightly. "He never really recovered from that. 30 years of work, of building something from nothing, gone because someone decided he wasn't worth the risk." The room fell quiet for a moment, the weight of her story hanging in the air between them. "That's why you spoke up today," Jeremiah said softly. "When security was taking me out." Ava nodded, wiping quickly at her eyes. "Because no one ever did for my father." Her voice grew stronger. "I saw what was happening, and I couldn't stay quiet. Not again. Even though I was scared, even though I knew it might cost me my job." Jeremiah leaned forward slightly, his expression thoughtful. "What if I offered you a different job?" Ava looked at him questioningly. "Interim branch lead," he said, "reporting directly to me." Ava's eyes widened in surprise, then quickly shifted to uncertainty. "Mr. Rhodes, Jeremiah, I can't. I'm not ready for something like that. I'm just an intern." "You're more than that," Jeremiah replied. "You saw what was wrong here long before today, but you didn't let it corrupt you. You stayed true to your principles, even when it was difficult, even when it was scary." He paused, letting his words sink in. "That's exactly the kind of leadership this place needs." Ava shook her head slightly, still uncertain. "I wouldn't know where to start." "Sleep on it," Jeremiah said, rising from his chair. "Take some time to think it through. The offer will still be there tomorrow." Ava stood as well, gathering her box. She walked toward the door, then turned back one last time. "Thank you," she said softly. "Not just for the offer, but for doing something about all of this." Jeremiah stood in the doorway, watching as she made her way down the dimly lit hallway. "Sometimes the ones who think they're not ready," he said softly, "are the ones who are." The morning sun cast long shadows through the towering glass windows of Dominion Trust's headquarters. The usual bustle of morning activity was absent, replaced by an eerie stillness that seemed to echo through the empty corridors. The security guards at the entrance stood a little straighter, as a group of men and women in expensive suits stormed through the revolving doors, their faces set in hard lines of anger and indignation. The regional managers had arrived en masse, their quick footsteps clicking against the marble floors as they made their way to the main conference room. Leading the pack was Marcus Davidson, the Southeast Regional Director, his face flushed with barely contained fury. Inside the conference room, Jeremiah Rhodes sat calmly at the head of the table, a stack of folders arranged neatly before him. He didn't flinch when the door burst open, nor when Davidson slammed his hands on the polished wooden surface. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Davidson demanded, his voice echoing off the walls. "You can't just walk in here and start firing people without proper protocol." The other regional managers filed in behind him, their expressions ranging from outrage to confusion. Sarah Martinez, the Western Regional Director, stepped forward, her voice sharp but controlled. "We've got branches in chaos, employees in panic, and no explanation from corporate. This isn't how things are done at Dominion Trust." Jeremiah remained seated, his posture relaxed but authoritative. He gestured to the empty chairs around the table. "Please, sit down. I have everything you need to see." "We don't need to sit," Davidson spat. "We need you to explain how you think you have the authority to—" 72% ownership, Jeremiah interrupted quietly, opening the first folder. "That's how much of Dominion Trust I now control through Nova Cascade Holdings." He began laying out documents on the table, each one meticulously organized. "Here's the complete acquisition timeline, certified by 3 independent law firms." The regional managers exchanged uncertain glances. Martinez picked up one of the documents, her eyes scanning the legal text quickly. "That's impossible," she muttered. "The board would never." "The board had already sold their voting rights," Jeremiah continued, his voice steady. "One by one, over the past 18 months, to various shell companies, all ultimately owned by my holding firm." He tapped another folder. "The documentation is all here." Davidson snatched up several papers, his hands shaking slightly as he read. "This can't be legal." "It is." Jeremiah opened his laptop and turned it toward them. "But if the ownership documentation isn't enough, perhaps you'd like to see why such drastic action was necessary." He pressed play. The screen filled with footage from the previous days, the casual discrimination, the racist comments, the systematic mistreatment of minority customers. The regional managers watched in growing horror as scene after scene played out before them. "There's more," Jeremiah said, pulling out another folder. "Whistleblower statements, internal reports showing discriminatory lending patterns, evidence of redlining going back decades." He spread the documents across the table like cards in a losing hand. All of it documented, all of it verified. The room had grown very quiet. Martinez sank into a chair, her face pale. Davidson's anger had deflated, replaced by a sickly look of recognition. "How long?" asked Thomas Chen, the Northeast Regional Director, speaking for the first time. "How long have you been planning this?" Jeremiah's expression remained neutral. "Long enough to do it right. Long enough to make it permanent." He stood up slowly, his presence filling the room. "The takeover is complete. It's legal, and it's unstoppable." One by one, the regional managers took seats around the table, the fight draining from their postures as reality settled in. They were no longer in control. Everything had changed. Several blocks away, in a quiet coffee shop tucked between tall buildings, Ava Chen sat at a window table, her hands wrapped around a cooling cup of green tea. The morning crowd had thinned, leaving her almost alone with her thoughts. She kept replaying her conversation with Jeremiah from the night before, his words echoing in her mind. That's exactly the kind of leadership this place needs. The weight of the opportunity felt overwhelming. She had spent her internship trying to be invisible, to avoid drawing attention while quietly observing the injustices around her. The idea of stepping into a leadership role, of having real power to make changes, both thrilled and terrified her. Her father's face floated in her memory, his proud smile when the restaurant was doing well, his defeated expression the day they had to close. She remembered how he had stood in their empty dining room, touching each table one last time as if saying goodbye to old friends. The buzz of her phone startled her from her thoughts. A message appeared on the screen. If you're ready, the door's open. Ava stared at the words for a long moment, her heart beating faster. She thought about all the times she had stayed quiet, all the wrongs she had witnessed but felt powerless to address. She thought about her father, about Jeremiah in handcuffs, about every person who had been dismissed or denied simply because of who they were. Meanwhile, back at Dominion Trust, Jeremiah stood in what had once been forbidden territory, the executive office. Just days ago, he had been ordered to clean break rooms and file papers in the basement. Now he stood where decisions were made, where power had been wielded so carelessly for so long. The employee roster on his laptop screen showed rows of cleared names, positions waiting to be filled with people who would bring real change to the institution. His cursor moved to an empty field, and he began to type, Ava Chen, pending promotion. The words stood out against the white background, a small but significant step toward transformation. Jeremiah closed the laptop with a quiet click. Time to rebuild, he said to the empty office, his voice carrying the weight of purpose and promise. The morning sun had barely crept over the Manhattan skyline when Ava Chen found herself standing on the sidewalk outside Dominion Trust's imposing glass facade. The building that had once felt like a prison of quiet desperation now loomed before her as something else entirely. An opportunity, but also a challenge that made her stomach twist with uncertainty. She pulled out her phone for what felt like the 100th time, reading Jeremiah's message again. If you're ready, the door's open. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything that had happened in the past few days. The confrontation in the break room, Jeremiah's revelation, and their late-night conversation that had changed everything. A cool breeze rustled her carefully pressed blazer, and Ava adjusted the strap of her leather messenger bag. She had dressed with extra care today, choosing clothes that made her feel both professional and authentic, a far cry from the careful invisibility she had cultivated during her internship. Two security guards stood at attention near the entrance, their faces neutral but alert. They were new, part of the changes Jeremiah had already implemented. Ava recognized neither of them, which somehow made it both easier and harder to take that first step forward. The lobby felt different in the unusual quiet. No hurried footsteps echoing across marble floors, no buzz of morning conversations, no line of customers waiting for service. Instead, a small group of people in business attire stood near the reception desk talking in low voices. They turned as Ava entered, and a woman with silver-streaked hair stepped forward with a warm smile. Ms. Chen, I'm Patricia Alvarez, part of the temporary operations team. She extended her hand, her grip firm and welcoming. Mr. Rhodes said you'd be joining us this morning. Before Ava could respond, familiar footsteps sounded from the direction of the elevators. Jeremiah Rhodes appeared, dressed impeccably in a charcoal suit, but wearing the same kind expression she remembered from their late-night conversation. Good morning, Ava, he said simply, as if this were any ordinary day. Ready for the tour? Ava nodded, finding her voice. Yes, I think so. They took the elevator to the third floor where the executive offices were located. The hallway seemed longer than Ava remembered from her few ventures up here during her internship. Jeremiah led her past several empty offices, their nameplates recently removed, until they reached a corner office with large windows overlooking the city. This is yours, Jeremiah said, opening the door. Ava stepped inside, her heart beating faster. The office was spacious, with a solid wooden desk, comfortable chairs, and a small conference table by the window. Sunlight streamed through the glass, warming the room. This had been Branch Manager Davidson's office, the same man who had barely acknowledged her existence during her entire internship. This is too much, Ava said, her voice barely above a whisper. I've never even managed a team before. Jeremiah moved to stand beside her, both of them looking out at the city below. You know what I saw in that break room? He asked. When everyone else stayed silent, when security was dragging me out, you spoke up. You didn't know who I was. You didn't know if it would cost you your job. You just knew something was wrong, and you couldn't stay quiet. He turned to face her, his expression serious. I didn't pick you because you're perfect. I picked you because you cared when it counted. Ava felt tears threatening to form and blinked them back. But what if I mess up? What if I'm not ready for this kind of responsibility? Then you'll learn from it and you'll do better next time. Jeremiah walked to the desk and placed a thick folder on its surface. But right now, I need someone who sees what others miss. Someone who understands what it's like to be on the other side of that desk. He opened the folder, revealing stacks of paperwork inside. Your first task: review every customer complaint and loan denial from the last 6 months. I want you to look especially carefully at the ones that seem perfectly normal on the surface. He tapped the folder meaningfully. Start with the ones that look like nothing's wrong. That's where they hide the worst decisions. Ava moved to the desk, running her fingers along its smooth surface. This was real. This was happening. How will I know what to look for? Trust your instincts, Jeremiah replied. You've seen how the system works and how it doesn't. Use that knowledge. He headed for the door, then paused. The temporary team is here if you need anything. I'll check in later this afternoon. After he left, Ava sat in the leather chair, still warm from the morning sun. The office felt too big, too important for someone like her. But then she remembered her father's face when his loan was denied, remembered the countless others who must have sat across desks like this one, and heard polite explanations that masked ugly truths. She opened the folder and pulled out the first file. The application was from 3 months ago, a black couple applying for a mortgage. Their credit scores were excellent, 790, their income more than sufficient. Everything looked perfect on paper, yet the loan had been denied for insufficient reserves. Ava frowned, leaning forward in her chair. She had seen enough loan applications during her internship to know that something wasn't adding up. The couple's savings were well above the standard requirements. She pulled out a notepad and began making notes, questions forming in her mind. Let's see how deep this goes, she muttered, reaching for the next file in the stack. The sun had barely risen over Manhattan when Jeremiah Rhodes arrived at Dominion Trust's flagship branch. The building was quiet, with only security and early-arriving temporary staff present. As he approached his office door, something caught his eye. A white envelope lying on the floor, clearly slipped underneath during the night. Jeremiah picked it up carefully, examining the plain exterior before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with typed text, unsigned. You're tearing this place apart. This bank was built on tradition. We'll stop you. He stood there for a moment, letting the weight of the threat sink in. The message wasn't surprising. He'd expected pushback, but the boldness of it, delivered right to his door, spoke volumes about the resistance he faced. Inside his office, Jeremiah had just settled at his desk when his phone buzzed. It was Marcus, his head of client relations, calling with troubling news. Sir, we're getting reports from multiple clients. Former executives have been reaching out to them directly, encouraging them to move their accounts. Marcus's voice was tense. They're targeting our biggest account holders first. Jeremiah leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. How many clients have been contacted? At least 15 so far, all major portfolios. And sir, there's something else. One of the former VPs, James Henderson, just posted a lengthy statement online. He's accusing you of waging a racial vendetta against the bank. As if on cue, Jeremiah's email pinged with a message from his PR team, containing screenshots of Henderson's post. The carefully worded accusations were designed to paint Jeremiah as an angry activist, rather than a legitimate businessman seeking reform. Before he could fully process this, another call came through, this time from Sarah Chen, his head of IT security. Her usually calm voice carried an edge of concern. Mr. Rhodes, we've detected multiple attempts to access the boardroom footage from Wednesday's reveal. Someone's trying to get into our secure servers. The attempts are coming from both inside and outside the building. Jeremiah stood, walking to the window. The morning sun cast long shadows across the city streets below. Can you trace it? We're working on it, but whoever's doing this knows our systems well. They're being careful. Meanwhile, 3 floors below, Ava Chen sat surrounded by stacks of loan applications, her desk covered in color-coded sticky notes and detailed spreadsheets. After hours of methodical review, a pattern had emerged, one that made her stomach churn. She had found 18 loan applications that shared suspicious similarities. All were from minority applicants with strong credit scores and solid financials. All had been denied for various technical reasons that, individually, might seem legitimate. But together they painted a clear picture of systematic discrimination. One denial cited insufficient documentation, despite having more supporting paperwork than approved loans from white applicants. Another claimed unstable employment history for an applicant who'd been with the same company for 12 years. Each excuse was carefully crafted to appear legitimate, while masking the real reason for denial. Ava wanted to march straight to Jeremiah with her findings, but caution held her back. The temporary staff seemed professional, but who could she really trust? The person who had processed these denials was still unknown. They could be among those currently working in the building. Instead, she carefully documented everything, creating detailed notes and scanning key documents. She marked each file for review using the new system Jeremiah had implemented, ensuring there would be a clear trail of her findings without drawing immediate attention. As afternoon turned to evening, the tension in the building was palpable. Security had been quietly increased, with additional guards posted at key access points. Employees from the temporary team moved through the halls in pairs, speaking in hushed tones. Jeremiah spent the day in back-to-back meetings with his legal team, PR advisors, and security consultants. Each hour brought new challenges, more clients reporting contact from former executives, more online posts questioning his motives, more attempts to breach their systems. The sky outside had darkened to deep purple when Jeremiah finally sat down in the boardroom with Elena Marquez, his lead legal advisor. The same room where, just days ago, he had exposed years of discrimination now felt like a war room. Elena spread several documents across the table, each representing a different threat they faced. "They're coordinating," she said, her voice grave. "The letter, the client calls, the online accusations. It's not random. They're trying to undermine your authority and preserve their power structure." Jeremiah nodded, studying the papers before him. "And they have inside help. The attempts to access our servers prove that." "They won't go quietly," Elena warned, her expression serious as she gathered the documents back into her briefcase. "They've had decades to build their networks, their influence. They'll fight to keep what they see as theirs." Jeremiah sat back in his chair, his face illuminated by the city lights streaming through the windows. His voice was calm but determined as he responded, "Neither will I." The boardroom fell silent, the weight of the coming battle settling over them both. Outside, Manhattan's lights twinkled against the night sky, oblivious to the struggle for power and justice unfolding behind the glass walls of Dominion Trust. Saturday morning dawned with an explosion on social media that would shake Dominion Trust to its core. The first tweets appeared at 7:13 a.m., screenshots of internal emails that made their way through Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook with devastating speed. The subject line that appeared again and again hit like a sledgehammer: "Block the tech buyer. Keep the face white." Jeremiah's phone buzzed incessantly with notifications as he drove toward the bank. His PR team had already sent multiple urgent messages, each one more pressing than the last. The emails being shared revealed conversations from 4 months ago, secret discussions between former board members and their legal consultants about how to prevent or reverse Jeremiah's acquisition of the bank once they discovered his race. "We need immediate containment protocols," read one message from his crisis management team. "Media outlets are picking up the story, all major networks en route to HQ." By the time Jeremiah pulled into the underground parking garage, the situation outside had already escalated. Crowds gathered on both sides of the main entrance. Protesters holding signs denouncing racism faced off against supporters of the traditional banking system. Security guards formed a human barrier between the groups, while news vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching toward the morning sky. Inside the building's lobby, Ava Chen watched the chaos unfolding through the glass doors. She had arrived early, hoping to continue her investigation into the suspicious loan denials. Instead, she found herself witnessing what looked like the beginning of a civil rights demonstration. "Ms. Chen," called one of the security officers, Mr. Rhodes asked that you meet him in the executive conference room immediately. Ava found Jeremiah already set up in the conference room, multiple laptops open before him displaying various news feeds and social media monitoring dashboards. His usual calm demeanor remained, but she could see the tension in his shoulders as he scrolled through the leaked emails. "Have you seen them?" he asked as she took a seat beside him. "Yes," Ava replied, pulling out her tablet. "I've been analyzing the email chain since the first post went viral." Together, they reviewed the damaging correspondence. The messages painted a clear picture of panic among the former leadership when they realized who was behind the Nova Cascade Holdings acquisition. References to maintaining the bank's traditional image and protecting our legacy clientele were thinly veiled racist dog whistles. "Look at this one," Jeremiah said, pointing to a particularly inflammatory exchange. "We can't let them turn this into another diversity experiment. Find a way to block it legally." Ava nodded grimly, but her attention had caught on something else. She leaned closer to the screen, frowning at the email timestamps and sender information. "Wait," she said, pulling up a different message thread. "This doesn't make sense." "What is it?" Jeremiah asked, noting her concerned expression. "This email here," Ava pointed to one of the screenshots. "It's from a private account I don't recognize, but the timestamp and writing style." She pulled up the employee directory on her tablet. "This wasn't sent by any of the former board members. This is recent from someone still here." Jeremiah's eyes narrowed as he examined the email more closely. The message in question contained inside information about current operations, details that only someone with present access to the bank's systems would know. "Can we trace it?" he asked, already reaching for his phone to contact IT security. "Give me a minute," Ava said, her fingers flying across her keyboard. As an interim branch lead, she had access to the internal server logs. She pulled up the activity records from the past week, focusing on external email communications. The conference room fell silent except for the sound of typing and the muffled chants of protesters outside. After several tense minutes, Ava's screen displayed a series of log entries that made her breath catch. "Found it," she said quietly. "The leak. It came from inside the building. Someone on your temporary administrative team has been accessing restricted files and sending them to an external account." Jeremiah stood up slowly, walking to the window that overlooked the growing crowd below. The morning sun cast harsh shadows across his face as he processed this new betrayal. When he turned back to Ava, his expression was grim. "We don't just have rot in the walls," he said, his voice heavy with realization. "We brought some of it back in." The server logs on Ava's screen continued to update in real time, each new entry confirming their fears. Someone they had trusted to help rebuild had instead brought the corruption right back through the front door. The Sunday morning sun cast long shadows through the windows of Dominion Trust's flagship branch. Outside, a handful of persistent news crews maintained their vigil, cameras ready for any sign of movement or story development. Inside, the usually bustling lobby sat empty except for enhanced security personnel stationed at strategic points. Jeremiah Rhodes stood at the head of the conference room table, his expression measured as he faced the small group of employees who had been cleared to return. The room held maybe 20 people, a mix of temporary hires and existing staff who had passed the initial vetting process. The tension in the air was palpable, with some people avoiding eye contact while others watched him with barely concealed anxiety. "I know you've all seen the news," Jeremiah began, his voice steady and clear. "The leaked emails that surfaced yesterday weren't just about exposing the past. They were meant to destabilize our present." He clicked a remote and the large screen behind him displayed a timeline of events. "What you might not know is that these leaks came from inside our temporary administration team. Someone we brought in to help rebuild has been actively working to undermine us." A wave of whispers rippled through the room. Sarah Chen, a risk analyst who had been with the bank for 5 years, raised her hand tentatively. "How do we know who to trust?" "That's exactly the question we need to address," Jeremiah replied, setting down the remote and leaning forward on the table. "Right now, trust is thin. I can see it in this room. Everyone's wondering about everyone else." He straightened up and walked around the table slowly, making eye contact with each person present. "So, I'm going to give you a choice. Right here. Right now." The room fell silent as he continued. "You can stay and help me tear this down and build something better, or you can walk now. No hard feelings, no black marks on your record. But if you stay..." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "If you stay, you protect each other. We become a unit. We watch each other's backs because that's what it's going to take to make this work." The silence stretched for several long moments. Then, quietly, 3 people stood up and gathered their things. A middle-aged man in accounting, a recently hired compliance officer, a young woman from marketing. They left without a word, their chairs scraping against the floor in the heavy quiet. Those who remained sat straighter, their expressions hardening with resolve. Among them, a young intern named Marcus raised his hand hesitantly. "Sir, there's something you should know," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Friday night, around 11 p.m., I was working late on some filing. I saw Mr. Davidson, one of the suspended senior associates, entering through the side door. He used his old key card." Jeremiah's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened. "Thank you, Marcus. That's exactly the kind of information sharing we need." As the meeting continued with security protocols and new reporting procedures, Ava Chen's phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen, her mother's number. Excusing herself quietly, she stepped into the hallway to take the call. "Mom?" "Ava, why are they putting your face on the news?" Her mother's voice was tight with worry. "They're calling you a conspirator, saying you helped plan this takeover. Your father is beside himself with worry." Ava maintained her composure, her voice steady as she responded, "Mom, it's okay. I'm doing the right thing here. We're trying to fix something that's been broken for a long time." "But the risk, Ava. These people, they're powerful. They can hurt your future." "I know, Mom. I have to go now. I love you." After ending the call, Ava leaned against the wall, her professional facade crumbling. Tears welled up in her eyes as the weight of everything, the publicity, the pressure, her parents' fear, crashed over her. She slid down to sit on the floor, trying to muffle her sobs with her hand. Footsteps approached, and she looked up to see Jeremiah standing there, his expression understanding. He sat down beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. "They don't want people like us here," he said quietly, staring straight ahead. "That's why we're the ones who have to be." Ava wiped her eyes, drawing strength from his words and presence. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, before returning to the meeting, where the remaining team was already organizing into new security protocols and communication channels. As night fell over the city, the news crews finally packed up their equipment and departed. The protesters had long since gone home. Jeremiah walked the empty branch floor alone, his footsteps echoing in the darkness. He checked each office methodically, ensuring everything was secure. In one of the senior loan officer's offices, something caught his eye, a small yellow square stuck to the computer monitor. He approached slowly, reading the handwritten message on the post-it note. "You're a virus in the bloodstream." Jeremiah reached out and peeled off the note with deliberate care. He held it up to the dim light coming through the window, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "That means we're close," he murmured, tearing the note down slowly. Monday morning arrived with a weight of anticipation hanging over Dominion Trust's headquarters. The weekend's media storm had barely settled, with social media still ablaze over the leaked emails showing attempts to block Jeremiah's ownership based on his race. The glass-walled executive conference room hummed with the soft whir of technology being set up for the national leadership video call. Jeremiah stood at the window watching the city below come to life. His reflection showed a man composed and ready, dressed in a charcoal suit that spoke of quiet authority. Behind him, technicians made final adjustments to the video conferencing system, while his assistant arranged folders of documentation at each seat. At precisely 9 a.m., the large screens flickered to life, revealing faces of the 23 regional directors and national board members. Some wore expressions of barely concealed hostility. Others masked their emotions behind professional veneers. Jeremiah had spent the weekend studying their files. He knew which ones had been working to undermine him, which ones had stayed neutral, and which few might actually support real change. "Good morning," Jeremiah said, his voice carrying clearly through the audio system. "I appreciate you all making time for this emergency session." He remained standing, commanding the room's attention naturally. "I understand many of you have concerns about the direction of Dominion Trust under my leadership." A senior director from the Midwest, Thomas Wheeler, didn't wait for an invitation to speak. "Concerns? You've created chaos, Mr. Rhodes. Our stock has dropped 12 points since Friday. Major clients are threatening to leave. You've turned our institution into a media circus." Jeremiah nodded slowly, acknowledging the outburst without being rattled by it. "I understand those concerns, Mr. Wheeler, and I'm about to show you exactly why such disruption was necessary." He pressed a button on his tablet, and the screen split to show a series of data visualizations. "What you're looking at is 6 years of internal data from across all Dominion Trust branches," Jeremiah explained, his voice taking on a teacher's patience. "The first map shows loan rejection rates by zip code overlaid with demographic data. The heat map glowed red in predominantly minority neighborhoods, orange in mixed areas, and cool blue in majority white districts. The pattern was unmistakable. In areas with over 60% minority populations, loan rejection rates are triple the national average, even when controlling for income, credit score, and debt-to-income ratio," Jeremiah continued, clicking through to the next slide. "But that's just the beginning." The screen changed to show an organizational chart with salary and promotion data. This visualization tracks career progression within Dominion Trust. Notice how the leadership pipeline narrows dramatically for women and minorities after middle management. He highlighted specific data points. "We lose 22% of minority staff within their first 18 months, compared to only 7% of white employees. Exit interviews consistently cite cultural issues and limited advancement opportunities." Several faces on the video screens had grown uncomfortable. One director tried to interrupt, but Jeremiah held up his hand firmly. "I'm not finished," he said, his tone brooking no argument, "because this next part is crucial." He brought up a new series of slides, these showing internal communication patterns and decision-making flows. Our current systems actively discourage transparency. Loan decisions that should be based on objective criteria are instead influenced by individual biases at multiple points in the process. We've created a culture where discrimination isn't just possible, it's baked into our procedures. The room had grown very quiet. Even Wheeler had stopped trying to interject. "But," Jeremiah said, straightening his jacket as he moved to the center of the room, "I didn't call this meeting to simply point out problems. I'm here to present solutions." With another tap on his tablet, he revealed a new presentation titled The Equal Access Initiative. The logo was clean, professional, and modern, clearly the work of a top-tier design team. "Starting today, we're implementing a complete overhaul of our lending and hiring practices," he announced. "First, a new branch audit system that tracks every customer interaction and loan decision in real time. Second, complete transparency in our lending algorithms and decision trees, available to both regulators and customers. Third, a permanent watchdog committee composed of external equity specialists who will have full access to our data and operations." Protests erupted from several video feeds. "This is unprecedented. You can't expose our proprietary systems. The shareholders will never accept this." Jeremiah waited for the outcry to settle, then spoke with quiet authority. "The shareholders already have. While you were trying to block my ownership through back channels, I was securing support from our major institutional investors. They've seen the data. They understand that in today's world, equity isn't just moral, it's profitable." He clicked to the final slide showing projected growth metrics under the new system. "By eliminating biased lending practices, we actually expand our qualified customer base. By improving retention of minority talent, we reduce hiring and training costs. By leading in transparency, we attract a new generation of customers who demand ethical banking." The silence that followed was deafening. Several directors looked shell-shocked. Others seemed to be processing the implications. One by one, 4 video feeds went dark as members resigned on the spot. Jeremiah surveyed the remaining faces. Those who wish to be part of this transformation are welcome to stay. Those who don't, your resignation letters can be sent to HR by end of day. 3 more feeds went dark. The rest of you will receive detailed briefings on the Equal Access Initiative implementation timeline. Thank you for your time. Jeremiah ended the call with a decisive tap. As the screens went dark and the technical team began packing up their equipment, the conference room slowly emptied. Ava Chen, who had been observing quietly from the corner, remained behind. She approached Jeremiah, who was gathering his materials. "They thought you came here to make noise," Jeremiah said to her, organizing the folders with careful precision. "I came here to rewrite the manual." The afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Dominion Trust's main conference room as Ava Chen stood at the head of the table, her heart beating faster than she wanted to admit. 20 pairs of eyes studied her with varying degrees of skepticism and curiosity. She recognized the looks. She'd seen them before, directed at others like her who'd managed to break through the ceiling. The conference room itself seemed to hold its breath. The sleek mahogany table stretched before her like a runway, each face along its length a potential ally or obstacle. Some of the older employees shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, their body language speaking volumes about their thoughts on having someone so young and Asian leading their meeting. Ava smoothed her navy blazer, a gesture more for self-assurance than appearance. The weight of her new employee badge, with interim branch lead printed clearly beneath her name, felt both foreign and significant against her collar. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began, her voice steady despite the flutter in her stomach. "I know this has been a week of significant changes for all of us." She paused, meeting eyes around the table. "Some of you know me as the intern who spoke up last week. Others might not know me at all. That's about to change." A subtle murmur rippled through the room. Near the back, Marcus Davidson, a loan officer with 20 years at Dominion Trust, made a show of checking his phone. Ava noticed but continued without breaking stride. "Starting today, we're implementing new protocols for loan processing and customer service." She clicked her presentation remote, bringing up a detailed flowchart. "Every interaction will be documented. Every decision will have clear, objective criteria. No more gut feelings about who belongs here and who doesn't." "With all due respect," Davidson interrupted, his voice carrying that particular tone of condescension Ava had heard too many times before. "Some of us have been doing this job since before you were in grade school. We know our customers, we know what works." Several heads nodded in agreement. Ava felt the room tilting toward his perspective, but she'd prepared for this moment. Without missing a beat, she opened a folder on her laptop and connected it to the main screen. "Let's talk about what works, Mr. Davidson," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I have here 23 loan applications from the past 4 months, all denied under your signature." She clicked through the first few files. All applicants had credit scores above 750. All had verified income well above our standard requirements. All had substantial down payments ready. The room grew quieter. Davidson's face tightened. "Would you like to guess what these applicants had in common?" Ava asked, though it wasn't really a question. "Those files are confidential," Davidson protested, sitting straighter in his chair. "They're internal records I'm authorized to review as branch lead," Ava corrected him, "and they show a clear pattern of rejection for qualified minority applicants. Same neighborhoods, same demographics. Different excuses each time, but always the same result." She brought up a particularly stark example. This one, a black couple, both doctors, with a combined income of $400,000 and a 790 credit score. "You cited insufficient documentation despite their file containing every required document, plus additional references." Davidson's face had turned red. "You can't just come in here and—" "Actually, I can," Ava cut in, her voice still measured but carrying an edge of steel. "We're not pretending anymore. We're correcting." She turned to address the whole room. "This isn't about shaming individuals. It's about acknowledging patterns we've all been trained to ignore or excuse. Starting today, that changes." She clicked to the next slide, showing new approval matrices and documentation requirements. These are our new standards. They apply equally to everyone. No exceptions, no special favors, no unofficial gut check rejections. Her gaze swept the room. If anyone has a problem implementing these changes, my door is always open for honest discussions. What I won't tolerate is passive aggression, hidden gatekeeping, or status-based favoritism. Davidson stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. This is ridiculous. I don't have to sit here and be lectured by some diversity hire about how to do my job. He gathered his things, heading for the door. Mr. Davidson, Ava called after him, her voice clear and steady. Your performance review is scheduled for tomorrow at 9 a.m. I expect to see you there. He paused at the door, then left without responding. The tension in the room was palpable, but Ava noticed several younger employees sitting up straighter, looking at her with something like respect. She continued the meeting, outlining specific changes and answering questions. By the end, even some of the initial skeptics were taking notes and engaging constructively. Hours later, after everyone had gone home, Ava walked the empty floor of the bank. Her footsteps echoed in the silence as she passed dark offices and vacant desks. The weight of the day settled on her shoulders, and doubts began creeping in. Had she been too aggressive? Too confrontational? Should she have handled Davidson differently? She returned to her office, still strange to think of it as hers, and sank into her chair. The city lights twinkled beyond her window, a reminder of all the lives that depended on the decisions made within these walls. Her father's face flashed in her mind, remembering how defeated he'd looked when his business loan was rejected years ago. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jeremiah. Leadership isn't about knowing everything. It's about standing still when the fire starts. Ava read the words several times, letting them sink in. She thought about how Jeremiah had handled his own revelation, calm, prepared, unwavering in the face of resistance. With renewed purpose, she closed her laptop and pulled out a fresh notepad from her desk drawer. At the top, in clear, decisive handwriting, she wrote, "Policies to undo." The Tuesday morning sun cast long shadows through the glass-walled offices of Dominion Trust. Jeremiah sat at his desk, reviewing the latest IT security report with growing concern. His tech team had been working through the night, tracing digital breadcrumbs that led to an unexpected source. "Are you certain about this?" he asked the head of IT security, who stood nervously shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Yes, sir. The IP address matches Naomi Vance's workstation. We have logs showing her accessing the system at 9:47 p.m. last Friday, using an admin credential that shouldn't have been active." Jeremiah leaned back in his chair, processing this information. Naomi Vance had been one of the few senior staff members he'd chosen to keep during the transition. As compliance officer, she'd maintained a carefully neutral stance throughout the upheaval, even expressing support for his reforms. Just last week, she'd praised Ava's handling of the loan review process. The betrayal stung, but it didn't surprise him. He'd learned long ago that the loudest supporters sometimes hid the deepest resistance. He pulled up the security footage from Friday night on his monitor. The timestamps aligned perfectly with the IT logs. The grainy video showed Naomi entering the building at 9:32 p.m., using her temporary access card. She moved through the halls with purpose, eventually settling at a workstation in the compliance department. Jeremiah watched as she inserted a USB drive and began typing. The footage was clear enough to see her frequently checking over her shoulder, the guilty behavior of someone who knew they were crossing a line. "Call Ms. Vance to my office," he instructed his assistant, "and have security ready but discreet." 20 minutes later, Naomi Vance sat across from him, her posture rigid and professional. She wore a cream-colored blazer and pearl earrings, the picture of corporate respectability. Her face betrayed nothing as Jeremiah placed a folder on his desk. "Ms. Vance," he began, his voice level and controlled, "we need to discuss your after-hours activities." "I sometimes work late," she replied smoothly. "As compliance officer, there's been quite a lot to review with all the recent changes." Jeremiah nodded slowly. "Indeed. Though most compliance work doesn't require unauthorized admin access or leaked internal emails." A slight twitch at the corner of her mouth was the only indication that his words had landed. "I'm not sure what you're implying, Mr. Rhodes." Without speaking, Jeremiah turned his monitor toward her. The security footage played silently. Naomi at the workstation, checking over her shoulder, typing rapidly. He paused it on a clear frame of her face. "Would you like to revise your statement?" he asked quietly. Naomi's composed facade cracked slightly. "Those cameras shouldn't be active after hours?" Jeremiah finished for her. "That was changed last week, along with all security protocols." He opened the folder, revealing printed copies of access logs and email traces. "We have everything, Ms. Vance. The only question is whether you'll tell me the truth now, or if we need to make this more difficult." The room fell silent. Outside, the usual sounds of office activity continued. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking, muted conversations. Inside, the tension grew thick enough to touch. Finally, Naomi's shoulders slumped slightly. "They approached me 3 months ago," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Before the takeover was complete." "Who did?" "Former board members. They knew something was happening with the ownership structure, but they couldn't trace it back to you directly." She smoothed her skirt, a nervous gesture. "They just wanted information at first, then delays. Small things to slow down the process." Jeremiah kept his expression neutral. "And after the takeover?" Naomi's laugh held no humor. "They were furious. Said you'd destroy everything they'd built." She met his eyes for the first time. "They paid me to delay you, not to stop you. But after you fired them, they said you'd burn the whole thing down. They wanted proof." "So you leaked the emails?" "Yes." She looked down at her hands. "But I was careful. I only shared things that were already documented. Things they could have gotten through legal channels anyway." Jeremiah pulled another document from his folder, a draft of the Equal Access Initiative with highlighted sections. "And this? Was this also something they could have gotten legally?" Naomi's face paled. "How did you—" "It doesn't matter how we know," Jeremiah cut in. "What matters is that you passed confidential reform plans to external parties. Parties who are now using that information to develop counter-strategies with legacy clients and private investors." The implications of her actions seemed to finally hit Naomi. She slumped further in her chair. "I didn't think they would. I mean, I knew they'd resist, but you didn't think about the consequences," Jeremiah finished. "About how many people could be hurt by delaying these reforms. About how many families might be denied loans while the old guard tries to protect their position." Tears welled in Naomi's eyes, but Jeremiah felt no sympathy. He'd seen too many tears from the other side, from people like his mother, like Ava's father, who had been crushed by the system Naomi helped maintain. "You'll be escorted out today," he said firmly. "Your final paperwork will be handled by HR. We won't make this public, and we won't pursue legal action, provided you maintain complete confidentiality about your time here." That's it?" Naomi asked, seemingly surprised by the lack of dramatics. "That's it." Jeremiah pressed a button on his desk phone. "Security will help you collect your personal items." 2 security officers entered quietly. Naomi stood, straightening her blazer one last time. "For what it's worth," she said, pausing at the door, "I think what you're trying to do here is right. You just chose the wrong side," Jeremiah finished. "Goodbye, Ms. Vance." After she left, Jeremiah turned to face the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office. The city sprawled before him, a maze of buildings and streets where countless stories like his mother's had played out over decades. He thought about the leaked initiative, about how the old power structure was already mobilizing to fight back. "They're not playing corporate politics anymore," he muttered to himself, watching his reflection in the glass. "They're playing survival." The evening sun cast long shadows across the Dominion Trust conference room as Jeremiah's most trusted advisors filed in one by one. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Ava Chen took her seat near the head of the table, her expression grave. She'd spent the afternoon reviewing loan applications, but the urgent message from Jeremiah had pulled her away from her work. Security guards stood outside the heavy wooden doors, a new protocol since the email leak. Once everyone was seated, Jeremiah pressed a button that activated the room's electronic privacy measures. A soft hum indicated that all recording devices were now blocked. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," Jeremiah began, his voice steady but serious. "We have a situation that requires immediate attention." He glanced at Elena Marquez, his lead counsel, who nodded grimly. "As some of you know, we discovered a leak earlier today. Naomi Vance, our compliance officer, was passing information to former board members." He paused, letting the news sink in. Several advisors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "But that's not why I called this meeting." Jeremiah clicked a remote, and a financial projection appeared on the wall screen. The numbers were stark, a potential $480 million withdrawal highlighted in red. "Hawthorne Asset Group," he continued, "our oldest and largest client, is threatening to pull their entire portfolio unless we, quote, reconsider our aggressive reform agenda." The room erupted in murmurs. Hawthorne wasn't just any client. They were institutional royalty, a cornerstone of Dominion Trust's reputation in the financial world. Marcus Wheeler, head of risk management, spoke first. "Mr. Rhodes, a withdrawal of that size could trigger a cascade effect. Other institutional clients might follow suit." "We need to consider a compromise," added Sarah Bennett, VP of Client Relations. "Maybe we could slow down the implementation of the Equal Access Initiative, show them we're willing to be reasonable." "Reasonable?" Ava's voice cut through the chatter, quiet but sharp. All eyes turned to her. "What's reasonable about continuing to discriminate against qualified applicants, about maintaining a system that crushes dreams and destroys families?" "Ms. Chen," Wheeler said, his tone condescending, "I understand your passion, but this is about survival. Without major clients like Hawthorne, there won't be a bank left to reform." "If we compromise now," Ava responded, sitting straighter in her chair, "we validate every lie they told about us. We prove that profit matters more than people. That money speaks louder than morality." The room divided quickly. One side argued for pragmatism, for finding middle ground. The other stood firm with Ava, insisting that any compromise would undermine the entire mission. Through it all, Jeremiah remained silent, watching, listening. Elena Marquez cleared her throat. "There might be legal implications either way. If we back down, we could face accusations of discriminatory practices continuing under new leadership. If we stand firm and lose Hawthorne, shareholders might claim we're acting against the bank's financial interests." The debate continued for another hour, growing more heated. Finally, Jeremiah called an end to the meeting. "Thank you all for your input. I'll make my decision by morning." As the others filed out, he caught Ava's eye and gestured for her to stay. Once they were alone, she seemed to deflate slightly, the weight of the day visible in her shoulders. "You were quiet during most of that," she said, moving to stand by the window. "I wanted to hear everyone's honest opinions." Jeremiah joined her, looking out at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the dusk. "Including yours." Ava was silent for a long moment, her reflection in the glass showing a mix of pain and determination. "There's something you should know about Hawthorne," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jeremiah turned to face her fully. "Remember when I told you about my father's loan application? The one that killed our family restaurant?" She swallowed hard. "I've been going through the archived files. I found it yesterday. The same bank that denied my father's loan? It was Hawthorne's fund manager who signed off on it. Richard Morton. He's still there, still making those same decisions." The revelation hung heavy in the air between them. This wasn't just business anymore. It was personal for both of them. Jeremiah thought of his own mother, of all the doors that had been closed in her face. "They're not just threatening our reforms," Ava continued, her voice growing stronger. "They're threatening everything we're trying to change. Every family like mine, every dream they've crushed. They want to keep that power. And now they're using their money to try to force us back in line." Jeremiah nodded slowly, understanding the full weight of what they were facing. This wasn't just about one client or one withdrawal. It was about the entire system they were trying to dismantle. Later that night, after everyone else had gone home, Jeremiah sat alone in his office. The city lights sparkled beyond his window, but his attention was focused on a sealed envelope on his desk. It had been discovered in the bank's archives earlier that day, a letter from William Dominion himself, the original founder of the bank, written 70 years ago. With careful fingers, Jeremiah broke the seal and unfolded the yellowed paper. The handwriting was elegant, confident. The words of a man who never doubted his place in the world. To my successors at Dominion Trust, our sacred duty is clear: to be guardians of generational wealth for the right families. We must ensure that the proper social order is maintained, that wealth flows through the correct channels, through the right hands. This institution stands as a bulwark against the degradation of our society's carefully constructed hierarchies. Jeremiah didn't need to read further. The meaning was clear enough. He reached for a metal waste bin and placed it on his desk. From his drawer, he took out a lighter, one he kept for the occasional cigar with clients. Slowly, deliberately, he held the flame to one corner of the letter. The paper caught quickly, curling and blackening as the fire spread. He dropped it into the metal bin and watched it burn, the founder's words turning to ash. "Time to write a new founding document," he said to the empty room. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Dominion Trust's main boardroom, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany table. The room was packed to capacity, with regional executives filling every chair and legal advisors lining the walls. The tension in the air was palpable, thick with uncertainty and fear. Jeremiah Rhodes stood at the head of the table, his posture relaxed but purposeful. Ava Chen sat to his right, a stack of reports organized neatly in front of her. The whispers and murmurs died down as Jeremiah cleared his throat. "I understand everyone's concerned about Hawthorne's threat," he began, his voice carrying clearly across the room. $480 million is a significant sum. Some of you have suggested we should compromise, slow down our reforms, show what you call reasonable flexibility. Marcus Wheeler, a senior regional director, leaned forward. "Mr. Rhodes, with all due respect, we're talking about nearly $500 million in assets. The market impact alone." "The market impact of what?" Jeremiah interrupted calmly. "Of standing up for what's right? Of refusing to perpetuate a system that has destroyed countless lives and dreams?" He pressed a button on his tablet, and the room's main screen lit up with a series of graphs and charts. These numbers tell a story of systematic exclusion, of opportunities denied, of potential wasted, not because of risk assessments or credit scores, but because of zip codes and last names. Sarah Bennett, VP of Client Relations, raised her hand. "We all support the general direction of reform, Mr. Rhodes. But surely there's room for a more gradual approach, something that won't alienate our institutional clients." Jeremiah's expression remained steady, but his eyes hardened slightly. "If our business can only survive by accommodating discrimination, it doesn't deserve to." A shocked silence fell over the room. He let it linger for a moment before continuing. "The Equal Access Initiative launches today. Not next quarter, not after more studies or consultations. Today." He nodded to Ava, who stood and took her place beside him. "We're not just changing policies," Jeremiah continued. "We're changing the entire culture of banking. Effective immediately, Dominion Trust will submit to an external ethics audit conducted by the Center for Financial Inclusion. Additionally, we're creating a searchable public archive of anonymized lending data. Complete transparency." The room erupted in concerned murmurs. Elena Marquez, his lead counsel, stepped forward. "The legal framework is already in place. The archive will protect individual privacy while providing unprecedented visibility into our lending practices." Jeremiah turned to face the screen, where a new set of slides appeared. "As for Hawthorne Asset Group, our message is simple. Stay and adapt to our new standards, or take your capital elsewhere. There will be no negotiation on basic human dignity." Wheeler stood up, his face flushed. "This is madness. You're going to sink this entire institution over ideology." Actually, Ava spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. The numbers suggest otherwise. She tapped her tablet and new data filled the screen. In the past 2 weeks alone, minority business loan applications have increased by 312%. First-time homeowner applications are up 278%. She moved through her slides with quiet confidence. Through our community outreach program, we've identified a massive untapped market of qualified borrowers who previously avoided Dominion Trust due to its reputation. These are people with strong credit scores, solid business plans, and real potential for growth. The data was compelling. Charts showed projected growth curves, risk assessments, and market expansion possibilities. By excluding these customers, Ava continued, we weren't just being morally wrong, we were being financially stupid. Jeremiah nodded approvingly. This isn't charity, this is smart business. We're not just opening doors, we're opening markets. The meeting continued for another hour, with questions flying and debates heating up. But the decision was final. By noon, the Equal Access Initiative was officially launched, accompanied by a press release and social media campaign. Throughout the day, Jeremiah and Ava worked side by side, fielding calls, coordinating with PR, and managing the immediate fallout. The media response was intense, with coverage ranging from glowing praise to harsh criticism. As evening approached, they gathered in Jeremiah's office, monitoring the situation. Elena Marquez entered with a tablet in hand, her expression unreadable. It's official, she announced. Hawthorne just confirmed. They're pulling all $480 million. Ava's hands tightened on her armrests, but her face remained composed. Jeremiah simply nodded, as if expecting this. Then Elena smiled. But you might want to see this. She handed the tablet to Jeremiah. 16 new investors have committed funds in the last 48 hours, all specifically citing our new initiatives as their reason for choosing Dominion Trust. Ava leaned forward to look at the screen. Her eyes widened. 620 million? She whispered. All socially responsible investment funds, Elena confirmed. They want to be part of what we're building here. Jeremiah set the tablet down carefully. The setting sun cast orange light across his face as he looked out over the city. The numbers were clear. Dominion Trust hadn't lost capital. It had gained $140 million. But more importantly, it had gained something that no amount of money could buy. We didn't just gain funds today, he said quietly. We gained purpose. Ava nodded, understanding the full weight of what they'd achieved. In one day, they'd transformed Dominion Trust from a symbol of old money and exclusion into a beacon of change and possibility. The morning sun cast a different kind of light through Dominion Trust's glass doors. Gone was the cold, sterile atmosphere that had defined the bank for decades. In its place, warmth and energy filled the space as new employees moved purposefully through the lobby, their faces bright with determination. Ava Chen stood near the entrance, adjusting her new name badge that read, Director of Inclusive Growth. The weight of the title felt right now, no longer overwhelming as it had been that first uncertain day. She watched as a diverse group of new hires gathered for their morning orientation, their excited chatter echoing off the marble walls. Good morning, Ms. Chen, called out Maria Rodriguez, one of the new loan officers they'd hired. Her genuine smile reflected the shift in culture that had taken root over the past week. The bank's transformation wasn't just cosmetic. Every desk now had a placard displaying the Equal Access Initiative's core principles. The stuffy old portraits of past presidents had been replaced with infographics showing community investment statistics and success stories. Even the air felt different, lighter, more welcoming. At precisely 10 a.m., people began filing into the newly renovated conference center. The space had been completely reimagined. Gone were the imposing dark wood panels and heavy curtains. Instead, glass walls let in natural light, and comfortable modern furniture created an inviting atmosphere. Above the main entrance, a new sign gleamed. Marcus Chen Business Resource Hub. Ava's throat tightened as she read the words. Her father's name, once rejected on loan applications, now stood proudly at the heart of the institution that had once turned him away. She felt a gentle touch on her shoulder and turned to find Jeremiah standing beside her. "Ready?" he asked quietly. She nodded, composing herself. The room filled quickly, not with press or cameras, but with employees, community members, and small business owners who had already benefited from the bank's new direction. Jeremiah took his place at the podium, his presence commanding but approachable in a charcoal suit that spoke of authority without intimidation. The room fell silent naturally, drawn to his calm energy. "A building," he began, his voice clear and measured, "is more than its walls. It's a blueprint made real. This institution was designed to exclude. That was its blueprint." He paused, letting the truth of those words settle. "We kept the walls but rewired the foundation." He gestured to the renovated space around them. "This hub isn't just a room with a new name. It's a promise made physical. Every person who walks through these doors will find the resources, respect, and opportunities they deserve, not as a favor but as a right." The ceremony continued with brief presentations from community partners and testimonials from recent loan recipients. No news crews recorded the moment, no photographers jostled for position. This wasn't about headlines or public relations. It was about cementing change into the very structure of the building. After the ceremony, as people mingled and explored the new facilities, Ava found herself in her office with Jeremiah. The space, once the domain of those who had rejected her father's dreams, now served as a command center for ensuring such rejections would never happen again. "I need to thank you," she said, her voice soft but steady, "for believing in me when I wasn't sure I believed in myself." Jeremiah shook his head slightly. "I didn't believe in you," he corrected gently. "I recognized you. There's a difference." He met her questioning look with a knowing smile. "Belief is about faith in potential. Recognition is about seeing what's already there." As evening approached, the bank gradually emptied. The new energy of the day settled into a peaceful quiet. Jeremiah walked the halls alone, his footsteps echoing softly on the polished floor. Each step took him past another visible sign of change: new faces in employee photos, updated policies posted on walls, community event calendars filled with upcoming workshops. He paused at the front desk, the same spot where he had stood that first day, ignored and dismissed. Tonight, the new receptionist, a young woman named Sarah, looked up immediately with a warm smile. "Good evening, Mr. Rhodes," she said, the respect in her voice natural and unforced. He nodded, returning her smile, and headed toward the exit. The night air was cool and fresh as he stepped outside. A city bus pulled up to the nearby stop, its brakes hissing softly in the quiet street. Among the passengers disembarking was a teenage boy in a neat school uniform. He spotted Jeremiah and hesitated, clearly gathering his courage. Finally, he approached, his backpack clutched tightly. "Excuse me," the boy said, his voice catching slightly. "Are you Mr. Rhodes? Is it true you own this place?" Jeremiah nodded, giving the boy his full attention. "How'd you do it?" the boy asked, his eyes wide with curiosity, and something deeper. Hope, perhaps, or recognition of possibility. Jeremiah paused, looking directly into the young man's eyes. In them, he saw reflections of his own past, of Ava's father, of countless others who had stood outside these doors feeling unwelcome. By remembering exactly how it felt to be told I didn't belong. By remembering exactly how it felt to be told I didn't belong. If you enjoyed the story of Jeremiah, I handpicked this next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.